Hey everybody, I want to talk a little bit about the most recent episode of Star Trek Lower Decks. And if you're watching this video a little while after I am recording it and publishing it, I'm talking about episode 5 of season 4 of Lower Decks. And people who follow me and watch my Star Trek videos, and even sort of halfway pay attention to me as far as my Star Trek takes go, probably know I'm not really a fan of Lower Decks. The show's not for me. I don't think it's funny. I watch it more out of a sense of habit and out of a sense of hope that maybe this week will be one of the good ones. But I'm not a fan of the show. I don't enjoy the show. But I'm going to kind of say something nice about it in this video, or at least I'm going to defend it, because what happened was there was a background character in the most recent episode of Lower Decks, and it's a character that we've seen before. This isn't the first time that we've seen this character, and this isn't the first time that the phenomenon I'm going to be responding to in this video has happened, but there's a background character in Lower Decks who I guess is just a member of the crew on the Cerritos, the starship that is sort of the setting of the show, and she's a Starfleet officer and she's wearing a hijab. I have no idea what her name is. I don't think we've ever learned her name. I don't think she's ever even had a line in any of the episodes that she's appeared in. She is the definition of a background character. We just see her in the background of shots doing stuff, and the only thing we know about her is that she wears a gold uniform, which means that she would be somewhere stationed or working in the operations division in Starfleet, and she wears a hijab. So presumably that has some cultural or religious significance to her. That's it. But every time this character pops up in the background of an episode, there are people within a certain segment of the Star Trek fan base who have a problem with it. And they have a problem with it for a couple of reasons that I'm going to get into and respond to in turn. But before I get into it in general, before I get into it specifically, in general, my overall response to pretty much anybody who has an objection to this background character being in Lower Decks wearing a hijab is, go fuck yourself. Actually, 2 responses. Get over it, and then go fuck yourself. Or go fuck yourself, and then get over it. Whichever order you want to do those things in, I would recommend doing both of those things. It's funny. I posted about this on Twitter and on Facebook before I did this video, and my friend and patron Siamak, and it sounds really classy and really sort of classical when I say it that way, doesn't it? My friend and patron, Siamak. He's a good dude who I consider a friend, and he's a supporter on Patreon. He's a Patreon patron of mine, so he's my friend and patron. But when I say it like that, it sounds like I'm talking about one of the Medicis or something, doesn't it? But anyway, my friend and patron, Siamak, who is a fan of Lower Decks and does appreciate the show a lot more than I do, replied to my post about this on Facebook and said something like, yeah, as soon as I saw the character wearing the hijab in the episode, I chuckled because I knew that you would end up having to say something nice about Lower Decks. And it's true. And he was right. One thing that I will give Lower Decks, and Star Trek in general gets credit for this, but Lower Decks is a part of Star Trek, and Lower Decks gets credit for this as much as any other show in the franchise. It cares about representation. It cares about showing humanity in all of its many colors and varieties, and that has always been a very important part of Star Trek. And Lower Decks has cared just as much about that as any other form of Star Trek, any other Star Trek series, and it deserves a lot of credit for that and a lot of appreciation for that, and I appreciate that Lower Decks does that. So the objections to the woman in the hijab showing up as a member of Starfleet in Lower Decks fall into a couple of categories. The first category is that it's against the established canon of Starfleet, because way back in the 60s when Gene Roddenberry started the thing, he said, well, this will take place in the future of humanity when we have outgrown religion and humans won't practice religion anymore. So there are these sort of canon absolutists, these continuity absolutists who are like, well, they're not supposed to be practicing religion on Earth anymore, so why is she practicing religion, right? And my answer to that is, well, it's a fake TV show, And if the people who make this fake TV show, which is set in the same overall universe as the other fake TV shows in Star Trek, if the people who are creating Lower Decks, this particular fake TV show, decide for their own purposes, as a part of their own creative vision, that actually they want to have people of different religions represented on their show, whether it's a background character or a more important character or whatever kind of character, that they're going to do that. And if they need to disregard something that Gene Roddenberry said 50 or 60 years ago in order to justify the inclusion of this character, then they're going to do that. And, good for them, because it's their show. Star Trek, the original series, established, albeit indirectly, that women couldn't be starship captains. And to their credit, creators of subsequent shows have basically completely ignored that. Because that's just a really silly idea. The idea that, we've outgrown religion somehow in 300 years, but we haven't outgrown misogyny and sexism and gender inequality, right? So subsequent Star Trek shows, including ones like Strange New Worlds, which are set roughly in the same era of Star Trek, the original series, have basically just ignored that and said, no, women are starship captains. That doesn't make any sense for there to be any kind of a rule against it. That women are starship captains. Forget that ever happened. Forget anybody ever said that, right? It's a retcon, as it should have been, right? And if you want to look at the inclusion of people practicing recognizable Earth religions as human characters in Starfleet in the 23rd or 24th century as a retcon as well, fine, it's a retcon. Who gives a shit? Who gives a shit? It's a made-up TV show. The universe works, the canon works, the characters practice whatever religions that the writers of those episodes decide they can, because it's fiction. Get over it. Get over it. As Mystery Science Theater recommends to us at the beginning of every single episode, just repeat to yourself, it's just a show. I should really just relax. The other objection, which is similar to that, but comes from a slightly different place, well, we need to be realistic about this. We need to have Star Trek portray a realistic, depiction of 24th century humans. And doesn't it make sense that if humanity has attained this sort of utopian society where there's no more war and there's no more conflict, and maybe, science is more broadly accepted and there's more of a, generally speaking, secular worldview and secular viewpoint, shared by the consensus of humanity, then you wouldn't expect to see people practicing religions in the 24th century, because that would be considered old-fashioned, and you just wouldn't expect to see it. Therefore, we wouldn't expect to see it in Star Trek and in Starfleet characters. So it makes more sense for them to not be seen, for religious people especially for people who are engaging in traditional religious practices, like wearing religious clothing. Like we wouldn't expect to see that in the 24th century. It doesn't make sense. It breaks the verisimilitude. You can all go fuck yourself too. Because here's the thing, and I've made this point a couple of times in previous videos, and I always have to end up making it again, especially for the most pedantic fans. Star Trek is not about people living in the future. Star Trek is about us right now. The future setting, the starships, the aliens, the conflicts between those aliens, and the Federation and the human characters, that's all metaphor. That's allegory. Star Trek is about us. Star Trek is about our world right now. That's what makes the show relevant. That's why the show is important. That's why the show still continues to exist in all of these many different permutations, decades and decades and decades after the original series went on the air. Because it's not about just the space stuff. It's about us. And it's about our world right now. And in our world right now, there are Muslim people. And there are people of various religions that wear a ceremonial head covering or a traditional head covering. Those people exist. They are a part of our society. They matter. They're here. They're a part of this. So they deserve to be represented in a show that is about this. And it doesn't matter whether you think it makes sense or not for those people to still exist and to still dress that way in the 24th century. That's not the fucking point. It's the same thing when people saw a man in a wheelchair in an episode of Star Trek Discovery. again, a background character in an episode of Discovery, just a guy, a crew member of the Discovery, a member of Starfleet in a wheelchair, moving through a hallway or in the background of a shot, and people were like, why would there still be a guy in a wheelchair of the 23rd century? Because there are people using wheelchairs in the real world, dumbass. That's what representation means. They're not representing people in the future. They're representing us, and they're representing our society. It doesn't matter if you can say, well, with scientific advancements and medical advancements and the end of the capitalist economy, and there'll be no more economic barriers between people and medical treatment that they might need or desire. You probably wouldn't see people in wheelchairs anymore. Okay, fair enough. Maybe not. That's not the point. The show's not about a realistic projection. There's fucking aliens walking around. There's fucking Vulcans and Klingons and Tellarites walking around. What makes you think it's ever been a realistic projection of humanity's future? Where do you get this idea that this is like some kind of Arthur C. Clarke hard sci-fi, speculative fiction about the future of humanity? They're on a fucking spaceship that travels tens of thousands of times the speed of light. And they see all these aliens that just so happen to look just like humans, only with a bunch of shit glued to their faces. But no, we can't break the verisimilitude of the super realistic version of the future that Star Trek has created by having a dude using a wheelchair, or a cartoon character wearing a hijab, or a person who is a trans person and identifies as a trans person and talks about their experience as a trans person because, well, it's the future. So, probably like gender reassignment surgery would, be easily attainable, and there would be no such thing as like a visibly trans person. They would all pass, is what people say. Maybe, maybe not. Who gives a shit? That's not the point. That's not why those characters are there. They are there to represent real people who live in the real world, who are watching this show, and who are moving through the world right now. That's the point of representation. You fucking nitwit. And then there are the people who have a problem with it being an apparently Middle Eastern or apparently Muslim character just because of that. Just because of that. It has nothing to do with what it says or doesn't say about the state of humanity or the state of Earth society in the 24th century. It has nothing to do with whether or not it agrees with or conflicts with something else that was established in some other fucking Star Trek show 30 or 40 years ago. It's just, they just don't like seeing a Muslim person in a shot. Here's the character. Let me show you the character. This is the character that a few people are upset about. And she's in the background of a shot. I zoomed in for this one. I'll show you the entire frame that I took that cropped in version from. That's her. She's just in the background of a shot. And here's another one. This is as close as I think we ever actually see her in the actual episode, except maybe one more shot where she passes, in front of the camera behind the main characters. Like, she literally is just there. She does nothing in the episode other than just be there and exist. And there are people that are like, oh, it's wrong it's wrong to have a Muslim in there because, Islam is such a repressive religion. And Islam it conflicts with the values of Star Trek to have Islam represented by a member of Starfleet. Okay, so apparently Islam is the only repressive religion. If that's what you think, I've got news for you. People who know me, people who have watched my videos for a long time know I'm an atheist. I think all religions are false, right? I dispute all of the supernatural claims of every religion practiced by anybody in the world or at any point, anywhere throughout history. I don't believe in gods, period. I don't believe in divine revelation, period. I think holy books and scriptures are written by people, not by divine inspiration, not by prophets, not by whatever. I don't believe in religion. I think religion is false. I think religion is something that people made up. But that doesn't mean that every single religion and every single person that practices a religion should be judged by the worst, most intolerant, most violent, most backward-ass thinking members of that religion. Yes, there are some Muslims in the world. In certain parts of the world, there are a lot of Muslims who believe things and even practice things that I find ridiculous and or morally repugnant. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. There are also Christians who do and believe the exact same kinds of things. Not literally the same things, but the same kinds of things. There are Christians that live in this country that would send people to prison and have people executed for being gay, for being trans, for practicing what they decide is the wrong religion. If they could get away with it, they'd be doing it right now. And if you think I'm fucking around, pay attention to the Republican base for about 5 minutes. Right? There are Christians in this country that if they were unleashed, if they were allowed to live the way they truly wanted to live, they would be every bit as brutal as those brutal primitive Muslims that some of you believe, that are over there in the Middle East doing what they do. Don't think for a second that we are any better than they are. Yes, there are some repressive, brutal, authoritarian governments in the Muslim world. There are dictatorships, there are fascist or quasi-fascist governments like Iran and Saudi Arabia in the Muslim world right now, where they are oppressing the people. They rule over the people with brutal, inflexible authority. And yes, there are, in Iran, it's been a major human rights movement for the last few years. There are women who are standing up and refusing to wear the hijab, and they don't wear it as an expression, as a statement, as a protest, because they are legally required to wear it. And that is bullshit. That is bullshit. You should not be legally required to wear a hijab or to wear any particular article of clothing or to do or say or wear anything. That's it. That's an oppressive government that is doing that to people. And it should be protested and it should be resisted. And if anybody is refusing to wear a hijab to protest that or to show solidarity with the women in those countries that are protesting that, good for them and I support them 100%. But there are also lots of people who practice Islam in various ways, who choose to wear the traditional clothing, and they don't have to. There's no legal mandate that they have to. Because it means something to them culturally, spiritually, whatever. They choose to wear it. And presumably, and this is a case where, sometimes I say intentions don't matter as much as impact, but there are certain cases, and I think this is one, where I feel like it's completely reasonable to interpret the intentions of the creators of this show and weigh those intentions accordingly and allow those intentions to factor into our response and our reaction to this. Something tells me the creators of Star Trek Lower Decks do not mean that character wearing the hijab to represent forcible, compulsory hijab wearing in authoritarian countries. Something tells me that's not the point of that. Something tells me that's not what is meant to be represented by that. It's meant to represent cultural and religious diversity. And I cannot think of a single reason why anybody would have a problem with that, unless you're just an intolerant fucking asshole or a joyless, pedantic continuity nerd who cannot accept that you're watching a fucking work of fiction, and because, we never saw people in hijabs in TNG, we never saw people in hijabs in Deep Space Nine, we never saw people in hijabs in the original series. It's a fucking TV show, dude. Get over it. Get over it. Star Trek has always stood for inclusion and diversity and representation. It has done from the very beginning. Gene Roddenberry may not have intended for that to include religious diversity, but we're kind of past that now, aren't we? It doesn't really matter at this point. The important part of that is that Roddenberry wrote into the DNA of the franchise inclusion, diversity, representation, and that background character on Lower Decks wearing a hijab is a part of that. Just like the guy using the wheelchair on Discovery a few years ago is a part of that. Just like trans characters and queer characters are a part of that, whether you're narrow-minded, short-sighted, overly attached to canon and continuity, fucking nerd-ass, think so or not. It's there and it matters. It matters in all forms of art and all forms of media, and it matters in Star Trek. It's supposed to be there. And if you have a problem with that, in Star Trek or anywhere else, one more time, for those of you in the back, go fuck yourselves.